Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be getting started momentarily. Just going to wait another minute or two to see if anybody else joins the call. Thank you for being here with us today. Okay, why don't we begin? So thank you again for joining us today. Welcome to our community conversation, Democracy in a Day, Expanding Access to the Vote in New Jersey. We are happy to be here today with our presenters, Assatta Mann from the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and Greene from the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And they are here to speak to us today about some legislation pending in the New Jersey legislature that would authorize same-day voter registration and voting for the next election that's coming up, and as well as to talk to you a little bit about the campaign and how you can get involved. Before we begin, just a reminder that you did sign a code of conduct when you registered for this session. Just acknowledging that this is a public forum, that you will behave appropriately, not put any disparaging messages in the chat or any inappropriate information, and that if that does occur, we do have the ability to remove people from the event. But I'm sure that will not be an issue today. So with that said, if you have any questions for our presenters, you can put them here in the chat box. And if we have the opportunity later on, we'll hopefully be able to unmute some people and let you speak to the presenters directly. And with that said, let me turn the presentation over to Assatta and Aaron. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, NASW, for having us. We're really excited to be here with you all, to discuss such a critical issue, such as voting rights and same-day voter registration. I think we're all on the same page in knowing that the right to vote is a fundamental principle of our democracy. And, we think that when more people can participate in our elections, the outcomes will better reflect our society and who we are, right? So the League, we're a nonpartisan organization, and we work year-round at the state and local levels to advocate for voting reforms that will help to best increase turnout and help new communities participate in the process. And really, we work to make sure that our elections can be as free, fair, and accessible as possible. We want to make sure that voting is easy and that all voters have the tools and the knowledge that they need to participate in our democratic process. I think across the country, we've seen voting rights advocates working really hard and around the clock lately. We all know that voting rights are under attack in this country, right? Voting rights are, they're on the front line under assault. In state after state, we're seeing efforts from lawmakers and officials try to roll back the freedom to vote. Over the last few years, we've really seen voting rights be chipped away, right? In 2013, we saw the courts rule that 2 provisions of the Voting Rights Act are unconstitutional through the landmark case Shelby v. Holder. And the 2 provisions that were impacted were Section 5, which required certain states and local governments to obtain federal preclearance and permission before implementing new voting laws, and Section 4B, which contains a formula that determined which jurisdictions had to get permission based off their previous history of voting rights discrimination. We've also seen waves of anti-voter bills pop up all over the place. Probably the most known of those is what has happened in Georgia and Texas, right? Where we've seen a law be proposed that would make it even illegal to provide water to voters who are waiting in line. I think as of May 2021, we've seen over 300, about 389 bills introduced in 48 states across the country. And these bills, they're anti-voter in nature, and they all contain provisions that would restrict the right to vote and limit accessibility to the ballot. These laws really run the gamut, right? So we see things like additional ID law requirements introduced. We see limits to absentee voting and excessive voting roll purges. In contrast, though, over the last few years, what we've seen is New Jersey really take big strides towards expanding access and making it actually easier to vote here. Right, so one of the first big things that we saw in recent history is a law that took effect in 2018 that that allowed automatic voter registration to happen. And right now we see this taking place at the motor vehicle commissions. So any eligible person who goes there and is applying for a permit, a license, or an ID card, they're going to automatically be opted in to register to vote. And they'll automatically be registered to vote unless they choose to opt out. So this is a huge boon in just automatically getting more people into the voter registration system. And we actually want to see this automatic registration expanded to other agencies, right? The second big thing is online voter registration. There was a law that took effect in 2020 that required the Secretary of State to create and maintain a secure website that would allow eligible voters to register to vote using an online form. And this just makes so much sense because as a society, we're already spending so much of our time online and on our phones, right? So this just creates another avenue for people to be able to register to vote or update their information in just a few clicks. And we've seen this online voter registration system be pretty popular and widely used. We can totally see why this would be popular amongst newer voters, younger voters.
Okay, here, do you want the pillow? Go get it.
Oh, we're getting some sound feedback from someone. All right, not hearing it anymore. Another huge win for voters, and something that voting rights advocates like the League and the Institute were pushing for so long is having the right to vote restored for those who were formerly incarcerated and that are on parole or probation. So this law took effect in March 2020, and we saw something like over 80,000 people who had their right to vote restored. And then the most recent, major win and major change to our election system that we saw is in 2021, just this past year, March of 2021, we saw that the governor signed a law that allowed for in-person early voting. And of course, now we're a few days after the general election, which is the first time that we saw this law go into effect. And we had over, I think it was 200,000 people who actually voted early. So, that's a huge win, right? That's 200,000 people who could have potentially not been able to cast their ballot on election day on Tuesday, who had another avenue to make that happen. So, we're really excited about that, and we're going to continue to see how that works for voters. Obviously, you can see here on our slides that one of the next big things that's left from this checklist of modernizing and updating our voting system and our election system is same-day voter registration. So we're going to talk in a second about how same-day voter registration will work, but really there are people who still get left out from being able to register to vote and being able to participate in our system, despite all of these advances that we made in expanding access to the ballot in New Jersey, right? So who does get left out, right? So people of color generally are registered to vote at lower rates than white people. And one of the reasons for this is people of color tend to move at higher rates, right? And we're often seeing outdated voter information on file with elected officials. So something like same-day voter registration would allow folks to be able to update their registration on site at the polls and deal with some of those issues in the voter registration system. Similarly, we see young people are purged from voter rolls at much higher rates than people over 30 because they also tend to be a population that moves more frequently, right? Think of young people, college students, people graduating from college. Usually when people are moving around, at the top of their list of priorities, it might not be to update their voter registration information. And in New Jersey, we've definitely seen an extreme rise in housing insecurity and just, a great increase in the amount of people who are moving around, right? Especially after the through the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw people facing extreme rates of housing insecurity and having to move, having to find new housing. And of course, many of those people, and we actually saw this play out in the election that just passed, did not manage to update their registration in time for the election, and often won't until they realize and they come to the polls and find out that they weren't registered to vote. Another population that gets left out is folks who are formerly incarcerated individuals, right? So we talked about the law that allowed people on parole and probation to have their right to vote restored in March 2020. Well, this law being signed, it actually coincided with COVID-19 hitting New Jersey, right? And we saw a need for increased social distancing. And so notices that were sent out to folks who, were on parole and probation, we saw those notices be stalled for months. And we saw registration efforts for newly enfranchised people were stalled for months, right? Voter registration practically came to a halt during the pandemic. In-person voter registration efforts for folks who were returning citizens were halted because of the spike in COVID-19. So ahead of the November general election of 2020, we saw about 400 individuals who were released from prison or from incarceration before election day, but after the voter registration deadline, right? So although on paper, about 400 individuals had their right to vote restored and should have been able to cast a ballot, they were not able to register and therefore not able to cast a ballot in what was arguably one of the most critical elections in our modern lifetimes, right? So many people are left out from the process of being able to vote through no fault of their own. But because we have really an arbitrary voter registration deadline that is so far out from the actual election day, 21 days, that needlessly disenfranchises voters year after year. But it does not have to be this way. We think same-day voter registration is the crucial next step to modernizing our election infrastructure and ensuring that voting is accessible. That's why the League, the Institute, and all of the partners that we're working with, including NASW, are very proud to be championing Bill A4548 and in the Senate S2824. This bill would allow any eligible New Jersey resident to register to vote and cast a ballot at their polling location up to and including on election day. It would also reduce the standard registration deadline down to just 8 days before the election, as opposed to the current 21 days that we see. We really believe that New Jersey can position itself as a national leader on voting rights by adopting same-day voter registration, right? Although we've been able to see all of these great reforms over the last few years, we're still behind at least 20 other states and DC on the issue of same-day voter registration. And now more than ever, as we're seeing voting rights being chipped away, as we're seeing issues with our people coming to the polls during our elections, we think that it's important to make it clear that we're not afraid to let people vote. And in fact, we want to make it easier to do so, right? So on the slides here, I do have just a little bit of information about the bill that we are talking about, A4548, S2824. The current bill status is that, it was introduced into the legislature back in August of 2020. And it has been introduced to the state and local government committees in the Senate and the Assembly. And right now it's pending. There hasn't been any action. Of course, now that the legislature is back in session, after the election, we're entering into the lame duck period, which we tend to see a lot of bills moving through, a lot of legislative priorities being moved before the end of the official legislative session. So, we're hoping to see that this bill move out of those committees in the next few weeks. So a little bit of information about same day in other states. As I mentioned, there are 20 states and DC who already have some form of same day voter registration. And in those states, we see that it is popular and widely used. In the 2016 presidential election alone, we saw or something like 1.3 million voters use same-day voter registration to vote, right? And this isn't something new or something that we have to necessarily recreate the wheel on. Although we've seen a lot of states that do have same-day voter registration adopt them somewhat recently, there are certainly states who have been doing this for a long time. You see a map here. There's states like Maine, for example, who have had same-day voter registration in effect since 1973, right? And in all those years that we see same-day voter registration being offered, we can see that it's safe and secure, right? Every applicant is required to provide an identifying document that shows, who they are, and also proof of their residency at the time of their application. So same-day voter registration is just as secure as traditional voter registration. Same-day voter registration also, we've seen in other states, helps to increase voter turnout. So across the board, we see about a 5% average increase in turnout. Specifically amongst young voters, 18 to 24-year-olds, we see up to a 10 percentage point increase. Amongst Black and Latino voters, we see anywhere from a 1 to a 17.5 percentage point increase. And the reason that we're seeing the highest increases amongst these populations specifically is because they are precisely the groups, the populations who are falling into our voter registration cracks and gaps that we have and are missing out on being able to participate in the process and cast their ballots. So with that, I'm going to stop and leave it there. I can certainly take more questions at the end, but I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Aaron, who's going to talk a little bit about our campaign and some of the actions that you can take to support this legislation. Like I mentioned before, we want to get this over the finish line by the end of the legislative session, which officially ends January 10th. So we're going to need all hands on deck to make sure we can get the job done.
Thank you so much, Assatta, and thank you so much, Jeff, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And as you have heard so much great information from Assatta about the same-day voter registration legislation and just a general overview of the importance of it, I know that you are excited about ways that you can take action to participate in our campaign. And so first, I want to start with, we have this action item here. I believe that you can put your phone up to the screen and be able to scan, but if not, I'll put the link in the chat. And pretty much with this action alert, you'll be able to send a tweet, email, or make a phone call to your legislator right now at this moment to raise up the legislation in the Assembly and in the Senate. So if we could just take a few minutes to do that, and once you've done that, if you could put done in the chat so we can see how many people were able to participate. And if you have any issues, please let us know. But this is the first action item that we want to start with, and it's something that we've been able to just incorporate, right? It's so important for us to lift up our voices and also contact our legislators, as they are meant to be responsive to our needs and responsive to the issues that we raise in our communities. And so we want to continue and increase our civic engagement efforts. Done. Okay, see, we see done using the QR code. So it's really great here. Great to hear. Thank you all so much for doing that. And one thing I would encourage you to is that since you've already completed it, if you can share with a friend or a family member that lives in New Jersey as well at this moment, if you could text them the link and encourage them to fill it out, that would be very helpful as well, as we get more people across the state and in communities to lift up these issues. It's always great. So thank you so much for everyone that was able to fill out the code. Go to the next slide. Now, just go over overview of some of the other action items that we have. And so we've been able to work on a actual same-day voter registration toolkit, which we have available. Thank you so much. Someone said they're going to share it. Thank you so much. If everyone, like I said, if you could share it with their friend, family. I'm going to do this actually. If everybody can share with 5 people, if we can just commit to sharing with 5 people, that would be really great. I think we have how many people on the call? so we have 16. And so my math is not great, you all, but I'm gonna take a guess that 16 times 5 is what, 80, right?
You got it.
I'm right. Okay, great. So we can, in this moment, we can all reach out to 80 people. I mean, collectively, 80 people will be able to fill out this form. And so just shows the importance of us working together and collaborating, and how we can continue to lift up these issues. So thank you all so much. I'll continue to move on with our toolkit, in which we have, as I mentioned, it's finished. We'll be able to share with you all, so you can implement some of the action items yourself, together collaboratively, on your campus, in your community. So first, we've already completed the first one, and with contacting legislators, and lifting that up. But also we have, we're encouraging use on social media. We actually have a social media toolkit that includes, different graphics, and also our communications director, our communications associate here at the Institute has worked with Assatta and Melissa in our group to come up with actually some tweets, a tweet bank. And so he was able to coordinate, I think, about 10 tweets that you can pretty much copy and paste into your Twitter, on your Facebook, and easily share. And also Instagram. I mean, if you are inclined as well on Instagram to share the graphics and just use the language that we have. We've been also encouraging democracy in a day as the hashtag. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. We're sharing that with everything that we tweet in regards to the campaign. We're using the hashtag democracy in a day. And so you can actually go on Twitter right now and search that hashtag just to see some of the tweets that the league has shared, some of the tweets that the Institute has shared, and also just community members that have participated in the campaign so far have shared. And once we share that information with you, we just encourage you to, utilize social media as much as you can. We know that social media in our age is definitely a great tool to, get more people educated on issues, but also getting them involved with issues, right? Just as in this moment with sharing our QR code, we were able to see, right? You all were able to send that information. And so as you share on Twitter and Facebook, you're actually able to, get more people involved. And so we all understand with campaigns, it's a collaborative effort. It's so many people involved, taking, these steps every single day. That helps push legislation to the finish line. And so just want to encourage you to be active and utilize your social media platforms to raise the campaign. And so we also, with that, social media ambassadors, if you're interested in participating in this, this is something where you would, share content on your social media accounts more frequently. And also you will engage with content that, some of our coalition partners share, right? For instance, the league is posting something or the Institute is posting something. We just encourage you to retweet it, share it with your network. And so that, more people will be able to be involved. And so, and also, we have information that we've cultivated, but also, with the social media ambassador, we would also welcome any ideas that you may have of ways that we can increase, traction on social media platforms. So, that's also in the toolkit. And so, you don't have to take notes at this moment. Everything that I'm talking about is in the toolkit that you can follow with us to get more guidance on, or you can reach out in ways that you want to help organize. And also writing a letter to the editor. The league has hosted a few events with this, trainings on writing a letter to the editor. It's very, very important to have more voices on this, campaign. And it's really great, if we can have people in different parts of the state submit, op-eds, letters, to their paper. If you're in your campus, if they have a paper, if you can, write a letter in support of the campaign. We have talking points. We have a lot of different things to help. So don't, it's not a big burden. We actually also have examples of others that have submitted letters. And what's really great is that it allows you to, share why you value the campaign. It gives an overview of the campaign, right? Some of the great statistics that Assatta lifted up, it also allows for action, right? And so just generally what we're doing with this presentation now, how we're providing overview, we're providing history on the campaign, the importance of the campaign, and also action. It allows you to, get that in a few hundred words and be able to reach a pretty large audience, through a local paper, online news and things of that sort. Also, friend banking. We kind of engaged a little bit in friend banking just a few minutes ago when I encouraged you to, send that to 5 people. But more so with the friend bank, it would be like a set time where you and your colleagues, would come together through a period of time to reach out to family members, reach out to friends, reach out to colleagues. And what you'll be doing is sharing, information about the campaign, sharing the phone to action, getting people involved and engaged with the campaign. And friend banking is similar to, text banking. I don't know if you've text bank, if you phone bank. The only difference is that, we're, instead of reaching out to people that you necessarily don't know, we're encouraging people to, reach out within their networks, right? And once we reach someone in our 5 people in our network, we encourage them to share with 5 more people. We encourage, and it allows us to build upon the connections and context that we currently have, and people that we know who would, be willing to support the campaign and be involved and help out in any way that they can, right? Even if it's just filling out the phone to action, that is something that, takes a few minutes, but it does have an impact on legislators receiving and seeing that people in their district are very, very concerned and interested in getting the legislation passed. Another thing I'll share is sharing and collecting stories. We have that as a part of the toolkit. And we think it's so important to, hear from people who have been impacted by the current 21-day deadline, right? We saw in the 2020 election that there were a few hundred people who were allowed to vote under the law that restored voting rights for people on probation and parole. But due to the 21-day deadline, they were released, they couldn't vote, right? And you also have students that are, in college campuses that are moving, and, they may not, register where their residence is on their campus. They may not know that, right? That's not a priority sometimes when you're in college, or it's not a priority when people are moving in general, right? I mean, sometimes for us as voting rights advocates or people are interested, maybe that might be a priority, but for some people it's not. And so we want to hear from people who, may have found out about the election maybe a week before, and due to, them moving, they were not able to be registered, right? And so we actually did a webinar a few weeks ago with Water Spirit, and it was very powerful. And I see that Charles, right? Charles, who's on the call, he actually shared on that webinar about his own personal experience of how the 21-day deadline and how it impacted him and the importance of having same day. And so it's just so important, that we hear from people that are impacted, because it allows for more advocacy, right? When legislators and people that are deciding the policy hear how actually the 21-day deadline that we have limits, some people from voting, it really helps with getting, the legislation potentially into law, right? Because we understand, there's so many different barriers, right? Sometimes people don't hear about an election until the day before, right? And, they may not, that just happens because there's just so many different barriers when it comes to, the election process and, access to information. But we believe that even if someone finds out the day before or on that day, they should have the ability to cast a ballot. And so same day would allow for that, right? So, no, I went through a few different things that we have on the toolkit. Like I said, we'll be able to share that with you all. It includes just a very great detail about the action items. It also includes a great overview of many of the things that Assatta discussed. And we think this toolkit is just a really great tool that we can utilize, across the state, to find ways that we can be involved ourselves. And so, we hope that you will utilize the toolkit. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us. We'll be able to help. Also, we encourage, hosting educational events, which you all are doing now. And we're really thankful for that, because it just allows us to reach more people, right? And share more information about the campaign and build upon it as we reach the lame duck session, which we are our goal is to get it passed. And so we know that's going to just take a lot of work collectively. And that's my overview of some of the action items. I'll turn it back to you, Assatta.
Yeah, I'll turn it back over to Jeff. That's it for us. We can certainly take some questions if anybody has anything.
Thank you both so much. I know one person had asked if we could put the QR code for the action alert back up on the screen again. So I don't know if you want to just go back to that slide. And then thank you both very much for the presentation. It was really informative and, you know, just so important to be able to take steps to help more people be able to access the vote. While we, if you have questions, folks, you can place them in the chat or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, I was wondering if either of you might be able to speak a little bit to the process of how the same-day registration will work, because I know one concern that a lot of people have when they hear about this bill is they just think that you'll be able to walk in and say, I need to register to vote, and that you'll register and vote and that's it. And I think people have some concerns about fraud or misrepresentation, and I know that there are provisions in place that address that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great question. And like you said, the way that the bill is written already, you know, in crafting this legislation, our organizations work really closely with the bill sponsors. And we took a look at the way other states already do this, right, to figure out the way that it could work best for our state based off the election infrastructure we already use, and you know, just the way we do things here. So to kind of walk you through what same-day voter registration would look like at the polls on the day of, you know, so you would have a person, an applicant who goes to their polling location, you know, on the day of election. And basically the way that the bill is written right now is that the commissioner of registration or the superintendent of elections, really depends on the county that you're in, and the way that they do things. But this person would be responsible for designating an individual at the polling location, you know, not necessarily a poll worker, who is responsible for receiving and reviewing, you know, same-day voter registration applications. So upon arriving at their polling location, the applicant will go to this county designee. First thing that they're going to do is present a copy of their identifying document, right? So an identifying document can either be a current and valid photo ID card that shows the applicant's name and current address. It can also be a utility bill, a bank statement, a government check or paycheck that shows their name and address, any other government document really that shows their name or address. And the Secretary of State, you know, once this bill passes and is in effect, can also, you know, create rules that would allow other types of ID to be accepted. But the first thing they do is they have to show an identifying document that shows their name and their address. Then they're going to complete a voter registration form, you know, on site, and then they have to submit an affidavit. This affidavit basically just says, you know, one, I'm not already registered to vote for this election somewhere else, to their knowledge, and you know, in the last 30 days, and two, that they haven't already voted in that election, right? The county's designee will read to the applicant what a penalty provision for voter fraud, which happens to be a crime of the 4th degree, before even accepting these forms and affidavits. After that process is taken care of, the designee then issues them a temporary registration certificate. This is just a temporary voter ID number, right? So this is the voter ID number that they're going to have throughout this whole process. And then the applicant is allowed to vote. Now, the way that they're going to be allowed to vote, it will really depend. You know, we foresee that this process will start off with people registering to vote and casting their vote through provisional ballot, right? Which is not at all really different from how we do it now. If someone comes to their polling location and they say, hey, I want to register to vote, and the poll worker says, okay, but we don't have you, unfiled to register to vote at this location, the person should be able to complete a provisional ballot, and they'll cast their vote that way. That provisional ballot will then go through the process, of being verified, checking their information to make sure they aren't registered somewhere else and they haven't voted, before that vote is actually counted, right? So not until everything is verified does that vote get counted. The other way that it can be done, and again, this is going to be left up to the Secretary of State's discretion to determine when this happens and at what pace, is that they might be able to have their registration verified on the spot and vote on the spot on a machine, right? And this is because we now have e-poll books, right, where someone's registration information can be verified on the spot in this tablet, this computer system that's supposed to be current and up to date. So as once we have same-day voter registration, ideally somebody will be able to come to their location through the e-poll book, have their identity and the registration verified or not, and then potentially be able to cast their ballot either on a machine or provisional ballot. So that's the way it works, and that's all spelled out in the bill. And other states do it either like this through provisional ballot or through they allow machine voting.
Thank you so much, Assatta, for that thorough answer. Yeah, I mean, it's such important information because, like I said, so many people think it's just, unregulated, haphazard, people can just wander up and register, and that's really not the case. I have a couple of questions that have come in to me privately. I will ask Annie if she wants to unmute and ask her question.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you both for this wonderful presentation. My question has to do with why someone might not be registered when they think they are. Why would your registration become invalid, and why might someone not realize they're not registered?
Yeah, so Aaron, feel free to add on to this. I'll take a first stab. I think, like in the most common of situations, a lot of the time we have people who just move and don't update their registration for themselves. They either move, have a name change, something to that of that nature, right? And they don't update their information. I think in other cases, counties can be trying to update their voters, their voter rolls. There's their own list of the registered voters. And I think there's routine situations where they might take someone off the rolls, right? If they've been an inactive voter for so many years, then they might get removed from the polls, and they might be purged from the rolls. And so, you might have a voter who hasn't voted in a decade, but then there's an election that turns up that really excites them, and they come to the polls and they're like, I definitely was registered, but it turns out they either have been removed or it hasn't been updated. I mean, those are some of the common situations that I can think of.
Yeah, and not too much to add on, but I think also too, like sometimes there can be, just potential error. Like for instance, if you're filling out a registration form at an event, for instance, it may not be turned in, or you might have filled it out online, and then maybe something happened with the website, or you didn't submit. Those are some of the issues that I've heard from people that I know that said, I definitely registered, I definitely filled out the form online, I filled out in person, but there was just some something that happened, right? And so same day would just be able for us to not have those issues anymore, right? If they do come up, someone actually remembers being registered, or taking the time to be registered, but some type of error occurred, they'll have the ability to get registered at a polling place on election day.
Thank you both. And then Andrea is just asking if we can, if you could just repeat, Assatta, what the affidavit covers that they have to sign.
Oh, yes. So yeah, in this process of registering, an applicant would have to submit an affidavit which declares that they're not already properly registered to vote for that current election that they're trying to vote in. That they live or, at the time of election, they would have lived at least 30 days, in the county that they're trying to vote in. And then that they haven't already previously voted in that election and won't try to vote again in that election after the fact. So, it's really just all of the safeguards. You are who you say you are, you live where you say you live, and you're not going to cast an additional vote.
Thanks so much, Assatta. I do have another couple questions that have come in privately. Razia has a question about how same-day voter registration would impact students who may be residents in other states but are here in New Jersey for school. Can you say a little bit about how students are impacted by this?
Yeah, so with specifically college students, like I just kind of take my reflection back to my time in college, not too long ago, but kind of long. You are, for instance, myself, I was registered in my hometown of Orangeburg, South Carolina, went to college in Columbia, South Carolina. And I didn't know that, I could, get registered, on my campus until someone told me. And so this allows pretty much, right, where, like I said, a priority sometimes may not be to get registered, but also, college students may not know that they can get registered, to where their dorm is or where their apartment is, and actually, vote and be engaged at a local level to where they are, right? If you're moving from another state, to New Jersey, you can get registered in New Jersey, and so there's sometimes just not a lot of information about that. I really wish there was more civics education on, specifically, college students knowing that they can get registered at, their dorm or their apartment. And so when this, say for instance, when this happens, right, if say the student moving from another state, finds out that they could get registered at their dorm, but they're within the 21-day deadline, this would allow for them, to get registered on election day, right? For whether it's a state level election, whether it's municipal election, whether it's spring election, whether it's general election, it allows for that. And so, like I said, moving is sometimes it's just not a priority at times, right? And I think specifically when it comes to college students, there's just not a lot of information about that. There needs to be more information about that process. But with that, right, having same day, it would just eliminate a lot of the barriers that we've seen when it comes to college students moving, whether moving from state to New Jersey, whether moving from another state to New Jersey, or whether just moving, for instance, if a student is living on campus for a period of time and they get registered, on campus, and they move to an apartment, in another, municipality or district, it just allows for, them to be actually civically engaged in New Jersey, and reduces a lot of the barriers that are, presented to them, since, as college students, you are kind of in a temporary space, but you are in that community for what, 3, 4, 5 years. So, the issues and things that are happening are important to you. And I think it is important for, college students to be, registered and voting where they are, living for that period of time. And so I know my answers are kind of long, but I hopefully answered your question.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And hopefully, Razia, that did answer your question. Anybody else have questions? You can raise your hand or put them in the chat. I do have another question that came to me directly. This one from Jeanette. Jeanette's, if there are any, if there's any evidence that same-day voter registration has increased voter turnout or had a direct impact on election outcomes.
Yeah, so for states that have implemented same day, there has been a 5% increase in voter turnout. For young people between the ages of 18 and 29, Assatta, I want to make sure I'm right, but there's been a 10 percentage point increase that we've seen. And for Black and Latinx voters, it varies between state, but we see between 2% to 17% percentage increase in voter turnout. So across the board, I mean, same day definitely increases turnout, and it's something that we know would, based off the evidence, we're confident that it would do the same thing here in New Jersey.
Yeah, and to add to that, we don't see specific electoral partisan outcomes shaped by same-day voter registration, right? There's no evidence that same-day helps one party over the other, or that voters of one party use it more than other voters. In general, it's just a common sense measure. People can find themselves unregistered to vote or in a predicament where their registration isn't up to date, regardless of whatever party they're in, right? So just wanted to answer that we don't see it specifically help one party over the other.
Yeah, this is definitely nonpartisan process and nonpartisan legislation, and it's really just about increasing turnout and making sure that people have an opportunity to exercise their voice. And this kind of leads into a question that Matt had sent to me, and speaking about support for the bill and whether or not it has bipartisan or partisan support. Matt was just wondering if there are any anticipated roadblocks that the coalition is expecting to see during lame duck, and ways that we might be able to address those.
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, Aaron, feel free to add on to whatever I say. But I think Aaron might have touched upon this a little bit, but part of our campaign has been legislative outreach and having meetings with legislators, right? To talk to them about the bill, to answer any questions they have, address any concerns they might have, and also learn from them some concerns that we might not be thinking of that need to be addressed. And, by and large, that's been pretty successful. We've, across the board in the Assembly and the Senate, for the folks that we've been able to meet with, we've heard, positive responses, and we've been able to secure, I think, altogether around 10 additional co-sponsors of the legislation, right? So, in general, we're seeing that there is support and an appetite for this legislation. One of the things that we do have to be mindful of, though, and, legislators have asked us and mentioned this to us, is they want to make sure that county election officials are on board and feel comfortable with introducing, a new change to the way that we do our elections, right? We went through this a little earlier in the presentation, but we've done a lot to modernize and make our elections more accessible in the last few years, right? With online registration, early voting. And so, as can be expected, and not surprisingly at all, some folks are worried about introducing a new thing, a new change, right? Which would be same-day voter registration. Now, same-day voter registration, it does not require any real major infrastructure updates, right? Same-day voter registration, we'll be using the same polling locations as we would use for the election anyways, right? When we use provisional ballots, we already use that. That's not a new change. We use e-poll books, that's not a new change. So we don't see same-day voter registration being a major or even a costly infrastructure change, but that is one of the potential concerns that we know exist within the legislature. We have about 2 more months left of the legislative session before the lame duck period is up. So we are hoping, with our partners that we're working with right now, to build some bipartisan support and momentum of the legislation. We're still engaging in conversations with legislators, and we hope that we do see support from both sides of the aisle, because again, this is a nonpartisan kind of common sense thing, measure, right? It'll help. It's pro voter, right? It's not pro any party. It's a pro voter measure. I can't really think of any other major roadblocks. Of course, we did just have this election, And although early voting went relatively well, right, we had over 200,000 people use it for the first time. We had, I think around 500,000 people vote by mail. We did still see issues across the state during early voting and on election day. Same day voter registration certainly could have helped address some of those issues we saw with registration, but there were other issues with like poll worker training. So we saw, some issues with machines, late polling locations opening across the state that might create some concern and roadblocks for same day voter registration. So, our organizations were working through what happened in the election, trying to see, why those issues really even sprung up, what could have been done to mitigate them. And we're hoping that that really doesn't derail same day in any major way.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering the same as far as what the impact of early voting was and vote by mail this election. It's amazing to hear how many people took advantage of that, considering it's just the first time. Matt's also asking in the chat, are there any Republicans that are currently signed on to sponsor or co-sponsor the bill?
Yeah, as of right now, no, we don't have any Republican legislators who are sponsoring the legislation. We'd love to see that change, right? So we like I mentioned, we're going to continue with our legislative efforts. So if you are a constituent of a legislator who isn't on the bill, regardless of the party, but especially if they're Republican, it's very helpful for legislators to hear from their constituents in their districts why the issues are important to them, why they might affect them. So, we definitely encourage you to reach out to your legislator if you're interested in, getting more information about, how to conduct these legislative meetings, talking points and things like that. We do have resources and materials, and we'd be happy to, support you in that. So please feel free to reach out.
One other thing I'm wondering, again, just following up on the question about potential roadblocks, and I apologize if you mentioned this earlier. Is there an associated cost with same-day voter registration? Is there going to need to be some type of appropriation of funds in order to make this happen if it's approved?
What's all you said on, but right now as the legislation is written, it builds upon the current infrastructure that we already have here in New Jersey. So as of right now, it wouldn't be much of a financial burden on the state to implement. But that could potentially change, with any amendments. But as it's currently written, it would build upon what we currently have, and as we've done a lot of work over the past a few years to bring New Jersey more up to speed with some of the technology and advances. This year we had the e-poll books and utilized during this election, and so we think that we also think that this is why this legislation would be just really great to implement, since we're not asking for significant more investment. We've already made the investment. It's just more so building upon that investment that's already been made.
Thanks, Aaron. So we have about 5 minutes left if there are any final questions. If not, we can give everybody 5 minutes of their day back. So before we wrap, just one last shot at questions. Feel free to raise your hand or put something in the chat.
Well, Jeff, I just wanted to say before we do hop off that on the slide here, Aaron and I's email addresses are here. So if anybody does have, future questions or wants to learn more about the campaign, about how to get involved, you can reach out to us. You can also connect with the League or the Institute on social media. And, if you in general want to learn more about same-day voter registration, you can visit the Institute's website. They have a page up at njisj.org/democracy-in-a-day.
Great. I'm just adding that into the Facebook chat, and I'll drop in the chat here really quickly in case anybody wants that link before we sign off. Well, thank you both very much for your time today. I really appreciate you spending the time with us and sharing this important information. And I hope those of you on the call that the webinar has inspired you to get involved and maybe reach out to your elected officials, ask them to support this bill, ask your friends and loved ones to send some emails or calls to the legislators so that we can make sure that this bill does pass while we have a few months left on this legislative session. So thank you, everybody. And for those of you interested, we have our next community conversation coming up on Wednesday, I believe. And you can find information in that in our calendar at NASW-NJ.org. And we will see you all again soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.